Hi everybody. I did a couple of videos in French a while ago called Charlatanism in the esoteric world, in the English speaking esoteric world. And I just like to translate some of that into English because only, only about 3% of the world are native French speakers, or that it was when I was over there. Whereas most of the world, 9/10 of the communication on the internet is in English, as a matter of fact. It's why English people are very lazy, can't be bothered to speak another language generally, because they don't have to, but it just makes them ignorant. Anyway, so what it concerned was a lot of people on the internet lay claim to have certain knowledge, and there is a kind of inverted snobbery that exists between people that are practitioners that do actually have access to very higher levels of knowledge, and the knowledge is really deep. I mean, it's really deep. And then there are academics. Sometimes they're both, but that's very rare. I'm principally an academic, but I'm also a practitioner, but predominantly I'm an academic, whereas someone like the now Georgievic Tellerman MA is also an academic, but he's principally a practitioner. He's someone that does the business, which is meditation and a deep introspective search for selfhood and communing with spirits and angels and thrones, powers, dominions, those sort of things. So, you have one friend of mine, and she's okay, she's a pagan, and she's from Lyme Regis, and she puts the words M.A. after her name. And that stands for Artium Magister, which means a master of the arts or a teacher of the arts, practitioner. And she's just put that on her profile. She's never had to do any tests. I mean, it took me 13 years to be conferred with the honours of a master's degree. It took me 6 years of actual formal study to do my first degree. That's a baccalaureus artium. And it took a further 2 years with a 5-year study break in between, that I studied even harder during the study break than I did while I was an undergraduate. And I also reflected upon my learning, and my grades were consistently better. So that's one example. Another example, again from Lyme Regis, is a guy whose first name begins with D, his second name begins with R, so he calls himself Doctor. He says DR, and he puts his surname. He did try to do a distance learning psychology degree recently, which takes 6 years, and he fell at the first hurdle. He thought he knew everything, and he just fell down because he doesn't have the willpower, the staying power, the endurance, the grit to work hard towards something. And there are loads of people like this, sort of charlatans, and they like to call themselves names like doctors and masters and things, but really they're nobodies in the grand scheme of things. Okay, so that's like probably the least offensive charlatanism that you find in the English-speaking world. It gets even worse. There's one guy, and I won't say who he is. He's a really important guy. It's like really, you know, very senior in the order of the world, and he photographs himself reading Latin books. He did a bit of Latin at school, but it's long since forgotten, and he's not particularly academic, and he acknowledges that that's not his thing. And he'll tell you all about Latin, and he even posts in Latin to make himself look clever. Recently he started posting in ancient Greek. Yeah, in ancient Greek to really make himself look bright. But really what he does is just look at the pictures, and he doesn't actually understand the words. He might know one or two definitions of one or two words, but he certainly couldn't decline a noun or conjugate a verb or tell you how any of the sentence works together within the rules of Latin. It takes very many years to master the rules of Latin. And this is a charlatan. Now, in many ways, the man is not a charlatan because he's genuinely like a superhero. I mean, this guy can bend an iron bar like it's a bloody lollipop. So he is like Superman in a way. But he likes to pretend as though he's a scholar. And he's not a scholar. He's not a scholar at all. He's a disciplined spiritual warrior that has extreme focus and very rigorous training in another form of arts, which is the martial arts and the works of Franz Bard. But when it comes to academia, he's nobody. I mean, if you were to ask anybody from Oxford or Cambridge or any academic circles anywhere in the world, nobody would have ever heard of him as an academic, because he's not someone with bona fides qualifications. So that's another example of someone who's a charlatan in one aspect only. And this is all about authority. It was a module I did 14 years ago now, A150, Voices and Texts of Authority. So when the person who calls himself a doctor, or the lady who calls herself MA, says that they lay claim to certain knowledge, no, Romulus, no. In reality, they have no authority to speak on the matter, because they have not been tested and had to take examinations on and pass assignments on every month in order to have the authority of that. For example, in this book here, this is the Oxford Classical Dictionary. There's a later online version which you have to pay a monthly subscription for. This is an old-fashioned one. But in this tells you a little succinct, brief entry about anything you want to know about the classical world, whether it's an ancient author or whether it's an aspect of the classical world. And each of the people that wrote the articles in this, and you can check at the back, they are the people that translated the work. So if it were the Hermetica, they would find somebody who'd spent their life translating the Hermetica, because that person will have much deeper knowledge. And this is Oxford University, by the way. These people aren't nobodies. They will have a much deeper knowledge of the Hermetic texts than even many practitioners will, because they've truly studied it really a lot more deeply than just getting drunk on a Saturday afternoon and reading a book to yourself over a pina colada. It's a different thing entirely. It's very deep, and specifically Hermetic philosophy can be read in very many ways. I remember when I did my translation, you translate one sentence, it has like a dozen different meanings. There are so many different permutations. So even if you type on Google Translate, you say, oh yeah, I know what that means. Yeah, I know what that means because I've typed it into the computer. No, it's bullshit. The fact is that each word has about a dozen definitions. Some of them go on for pages. Some of them only have one definition. But the amount of combinations of definitions between even just one sentence, and quite often a sentence will be 7 or 10 or 20 lines long, just one sentence, that it's Latin and ancient Greek is a very complex, very difficult, very hard to understand language that takes very many years to master, unless you were privileged enough to go to public school and you did it as a young child and did it through rote and repetition and chose it as your academic specialism, as certain people did. People like Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg, they followed through with their studies and they continued, because if you don't use it, you lose it. So people like this Superman guy, or even Professor Alice Roberts, she studied biology, and she admitted when she did her thing on King Arthur that she can't read Latin. She did a year at prep school, but because she hasn't kept up with it, because she's focused on biology, she's forgotten it. She doesn't do it, because if you don't use it, you lose it. So there's another charlatan, which is quite amusing. She's a specialist in Hebrew, and she's doing her thesis on the Chaldean oracles, and I upset her because she claims to be a great linguist, and she understands Spanish and Italian and French and Latin and ancient Greek and blah 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 and blah blah blah. And in actual fact, it's nonsense. It's complete nonsense, all of it, because when I speak to her in French, she gets like rabbit in the headlights. She doesn't understand, so I know she's swinging the lead. She's a charlatan. And then she's doing her thesis on the Chaldean oracles, and I said to her, look, you can't keep looking at the Hebrew definitions of words, because not every single Greek word comes from Hebrew. In fact, some come from a variety of different languages. Some come from Cypriot, some come from Hittite, some come from Egyptian, some come from Cuneiform, some come from Phoenician. All different types of language. They don't all come from Hebrew, but because she knows Hebrew, she tries to shoehorn every Greek word into a similar sounding Hebrew word because she can't be bothered to learn her ancient Greek and her Latin as every good classicist should do. So that's Susan Laybourne. And she spent so long doing her thesis that her university has actually closed, which is singular. So anyway, that's charlatanisms, and that's what I wanted to talk about. Just be cautious if someone lays claim to certain knowledge, like for example Professor Alice Roberts, who's recently going to give a lecture, and she's very pretty and everything, and she's got nice pink hair, and she dances at Glastonbury, and that's great and everything. But when she delivers a lecture on Roman imperial history, just be aware that this person has never actually studied Roman imperial history, but she has studied biology and been a presenter on lots of history programs. Okay? So, someone who's a specialist in Roman imperial history, as I am, will read many more books that are all to do, and that's all they read all day. This leads me to another point. A good friend of mine, a bit of a nutter, but he's a practitioner, and I'm a fellow practitioner. He once said that hermeticism, Franz Barden's system, is not like playing guitar. He said that you need to really concentrate to do this. Now, as a matter of fact, I found the opposite is true. I found that to learn the guitar, to master the guitar in the classical style, takes very many years of practice, of understanding scales and arpeggios and muscle memory and constant practice, professional, doing gigs all over the world, and that is difficult. Now, I did actually find the meditation practice and the going out of body very easy when I was younger because I was a natural. I didn't use Maharishi's transcendental meditation. It was just something that came naturally because I have a very active mind. And I was able to visualize and conjure the images very, very easily. So I found the opposite is true, but he also said something which is mentioned in Franz Barden's book. It's actually from African, I think it's Swahili tribal wisdom, which says that, a lot of martial artists say this. They say the hunter who chases two rabbits catches neither, right? And that's maybe true, maybe true. But you'll find that in very many religious traditions, whether it is hermeticism, whether it is Christianity, whether it's Judaism, whether it's Islam, they all say, even the Chaldean oracles say, this is the way, and there is no other way. They're all exclusive. So I remember picking up a copy of the Al-Quran when I was at my ex-wife's house, Anna, beautiful woman, ex-fiancée, and I just opened it at a random page, and it said, if you do not study this religion, you will not go to heaven. There's a passage in the Gospel according to St. Mark. It says something very similar, that if you don't study this way, you won't go to heaven. And in Judaism it's the same. They say in the sacred texts of the Hebrews, if you do not study this way, you will not go to heaven. So I think that idea that everything's exclusive is just nonsense, and each tradition tries to protect its own and shove everyone else out. Really, the Hermetic tradition should be open. You should be free to explore any branch of spiritual discipline, any of the branches. It doesn't really matter. So for me, because I'm very scholarly and I've done the music thing, I was a professional musician for 20 years, been an archaeologist, I've done that, have so many archaeological artifacts now, I've got too many to count, and I'd start opening my own museum someday. Because I've been deeply involved in the Hermetic side for a while. There was one thing, just one thing, that I was lacking throughout my whole life. One thing only. And that's that's money. Right? I've never had money. I've never been a rich man because I've never sought money. I've given no second thoughts. For me, money is very low down on the scale. It's much more the sort of spiritual path that I'm on. It's not about the money for me. It's more about learning to be a better person, about mindfulness, and about being considerate, being kind, being polite, living the philosophical life. Even before I've met fellow Bardenists, I was already reading the Hermetica for very many years, and you can check my Facebook wall. I'm posting about Hermes Trismegistus 10 years even before I met any Bardenists. So I'd been on this track for a very long time. I used to repeat the Pythagorean maxims to myself every day, etch them on my heart like they're the Holy Bible kind of thing. I recently found them in ancient Greek in the writings of Stobaeus, which is nice because I can now understand them in their original language. Some of them were written in Hebrew. Anyway, or survive in Hebrew. So the hunter that chases two rabbits catches neither. And I was in a bookshop. I'm often in bookshops. I look for stray books, and I found this book here. And this is just on the shelf, and I thought it was about wizards. Well, I didn't really, but I thought, oh, it's magical. It's a magical book. So anything that's magical, I buy. All of those are magical books. And I thought, well, this would be a good one to learn. So I read it, and I ended up buying all of them, and I copy them out by hand so that it's etched upon memory. And it's taken me 2 years to study this, and I study it every day, all day. And never mind hermeticism, and never mind music, and never mind Latin even, although I still keep up with my ancient Greek and Mandarin, because if you don't use it, you lose it. And I do a little Latin now and again just to keep up with. But really I'm focused on economics. And it's just recently, in the past couple of months, that I've hit like a milestone with this. So I couldn't really see the wood for the trees. I'm reading about everything. I'm reading about bonds and stocks and commodities and the history of financial markets and the history of economics. And I'm watching the economic news every day, and I'm really immersed into it because I'm mercurial. I'm ruled by Gemini, by Mercury. So I have the god of commerce and of eloquence and of magic. That's one of the stars that reigned at my nativity. I am the twins, Germinus. And so anyway, I really got into it, and it just recently I hit a milestone. So I think it's true that if you don't, like William Morton said, if you don't specialize in something, if you don't really put everything you've got into that, you'll never really get very far. If you try and do a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, it's just true. So anyway, so here's to not being a charlatan, to being a more mindful, considerate, kind person, to being wary of people that lay claim to knowledge but don't actually have any. They tend to talk a lot and are rather vacuous. They don't read, they don't listen. They do like to talk, and they certainly like to be the centre of attention. And last of all, here's to happiness, well-being and prosperity. Valete omnes.